Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Gibbs with Gambling News. I'm here today with Chad Kornett, Senior Vice President of Operations at GeoComply. Chad moved over to GeoComply only about a year ago, having spent 16 years at Gambling Labs International. Hands down, GeoComply has become the main geolocation compliance company for the gaming industry, as well as other industries such as media, finance. Basically anything online, GeoComply can handle it. Chad, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Now, before you jumped into gaming, your background was math and engineering. What really piqued your interest about getting into gaming and gaming compliance?
Got it. Yeah, engineering and mathematics, a bit different than compliance, right? But I was originally drawn to engineering because I just loved building things as a kid. Loved tinkering around with actually it was like tube amplifiers and audio equipment, those sorts of things. And that led me towards electronics, and that led me towards physics and math and those sorts of things. Then as I progressed in my education, I became like less interested in like the analog electronic side of things and was more drawn towards computers and digital signal processing, data analytics, those sorts of things. I remember my senior project was in virtual reality modeling biometric systems, those sorts of things. And there was just so many exploding fields in the computer engineering world. It was tough to choose. And so I thought I would kind of zoom out and take a broader view rather than choose one particular vertical, and I chose intellectual property rights law or patents, where I can work with companies to work on their latest inventions in tech. And then I got my patent bar. I was all ready to go in that field, and that kind of got me well versed on like the regulatory side of things, like understanding how language meets tech and working with claims and regulations and those sorts of things. And then right before jumping into that career, my mentor at the time said, hey, why don't you get some hands-on experience? The best patent attorneys really work as an engineer first. And so I worked as a programmer for a few months, and then I switched over to really a short stint. That's what the plan was at Gaming Laboratories International. I thought they were a company that made gaming, made actual video games. And I didn't have any exposure to the gaming industry at all. But after a few months of being there, I realized I was not going to leave the gaming industry. I was going to stay here. That blend of having like the regulatory experience as well as the tech experience, as the industry was sort of exploding at the time, market by market. And after a few years, had a chance to lead their technical compliance division and work with global regulators around the world. And that 6-month gig turned into 17 years pretty quickly.
Into a lifetime, but it is definitely a niche market that is obviously becoming more and more an intrinsic part of the entire gaming industry, right? It's not just an add-on service. Today, if a new jurisdiction opens up for iGaming, compliance and geolocation are fundamental to its growth. I like to say, you can't play poker without a deck of cards, and you can't offer iGaming without GeoComply. It's impossible. I mean, and you see it when the new regulations come out. One of the top questions when lawmakers are discussing how they're going to introduce the activity, how do they handle the question of compliance? And GeoComply is always there. I mean, it's on the forefront. It is growing rapidly around the world and continues to become just on the same level as iGaming. It's hand in hand with the iGaming industry. And obviously that's because not only is it a needed resource, but it's because of GeoComply's ability to respond accurately and provide the services that lawmakers and regulators are looking for. Speaking of that, because there are so many different moving parts and regulations in the gaming industry, and of course that's global as well as individually within the US, how does GeoComply face those obstacles, and how does it work to easily establish itself when a new jurisdiction comes online?
Yeah, there's a lot of parts to that. I guess at the beginning, the fun part, at least for our government relations team, is to get involved early, really understand the goals of the legislators, the regulators, the operators, and and the public in some cases. And you do tend to see variance from state to state in their goals and the intentions. And really at that level, we try to just educate along the way and make everyone understand that, look, this has been done before, in literally every state in the United States and internationally, that have gone live, and here's how it works, and here's the tools that are available. And luckily, we've been able to achieve a bit of, let's say, standardization amongst the states that have gone live. So there isn't like a huge gap in between markets, but a ton of work goes into creating an environment that's suitable for the nuances of each market. The tech ends up developing its own characteristics and flavor. Like, just thinking about how this plays out in real life, each state has its own population densities, its own availability of data sources, its own licensing structures, mapping resources, tribal zones, federal zones, parishes in Louisiana, approved, disapproved, those sorts of things. And having all that kind of pan out, you realize each has its own flavor. Just to give one example, look at Wyoming. Went live this year, 500,000 people spread out across like 100,000 square miles, where some areas it's tough to get a cellular signal versus Wi-Fi. There's not a ton of it out there, right? And then compare that to New York, where you have like 18 times as many people, all within like I think it's like 300 square miles,
right?
And most of that traffic is within like 2 miles of the border of New Jersey, with path trains and tunnels and subways and bridges and all these sorts of things. Or maybe you're working with like Washington, D.C., and you've got federal buildings where you can't allow play in federal buildings with the Ships to Luce Act. And, and then you have the stadiums, and you can only play within 2 blocks of the actual stadium. And then you've got the Class B operators, where if you're in a restaurant, you could play in the restaurant, but you can't on the street outside of the restaurant.
Right.
So even though the rules and the tools and the regulatory structure has some standardization and synergy to it, in application and operations, it can be very, very different from market to market.
Sure, definitely. But obviously, GeoComply has been able to respond to those challenges and get the systems up and running with what we've seen minimal, very minimal hassle. Look at Louisiana and New York. I mean, as soon as they went live, we're over a million hits through GeoComply's system in each of the jurisdictions. And that's, like you said, dealing with New York's small footprint, but then you have Louisiana, 55 out of 64 spread out a little bit. That can be challenging, but GeoComply was able to handle it and handle it quite well as these new areas have come online. How difficult is it at that moment of launch, when you all of a sudden have 500,000 people going online to make their first inquisitive entry or even a sports bet? How is GeoComply able to respond to that first immediate wave of activity?
Well, from an operations standpoint, you just have to be ready and plan for explosive growth. Like you really don't know what you're going to get. Within New York, within the first hour, we had 300,000 geolocation checks within 1 hour. We had never seen that before. And you have to be able to predict what might happen. It's really a matter of continuously looking ahead, preparing and thinking about what the biggest and most challenging outcome could possibly be, and then work out the system way ahead of time in order to account for that. We build our systems with a capacity that is more than needed, more redundancy than is needed, more human support and attention than is needed, and that's every minute of every day throughout the year, because online gambling doesn't stop, and particularly when there's a major event going on like the Super Bowl. And of course things happen. Of course, there's databases, there's servers, they have problems. But when you're, especially when you're pumping thousands of transactions per second through them, but when you plan ahead and you build redundancy and you have dedicated and insanely competent people at the helm, and you end up being successful with nearly zero downtime. And I'm proud to say we've accomplished that. Nearly a decade of learnings along the way, though. And in general, we understand how huge of an industry this is and how quickly it's growing. And we're kind of a critical operational piece that if we're not working appropriately, operators can't accept wagers. And so we understand that responsibility, and we do all that we possibly can to deliver the most reliable geolocation service on the planet.
Well, and obviously it does. I mean, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago with Super Bowl. Super Bowl had over 80 million geolocation hits. That's insane for any network, 80.1 million, I believe it was. And I can only imagine you and the rest of the team at GeoComply were on pins and needles waiting for everything to start unfolding to see how it went. Case in point, you mentioned about making sure you have redundancy and a good team. Coinbase rolled out a promotion over the Super Bowl through a commercial with a Q code that completely fell flat. Why? Because they didn't prepare, right? GeoComply, they've learned, they've seen what has happened, obviously, and know how to be prepared for any eventuality. And it's I mean, props, to the company for being able to keep up and anticipate the massive explosions that we're seeing. Now, GeoComply is more than just geolocation. I mean, you offer security and compliance, customer identification verification, location fraud detection, everything else, everything that has to do with verifying people are who they say they are, where they say they are, when they say they are. What's next on the radar for the company?
Well, we really see the future of GeoComply as really just being an important part of every digital transaction where integrity is important. And I know that's extremely broad, but that's actually intentional. The reality is that in this digital world, any fraudster is going to try to hide their location. It would be crazy for them not to, right? Because they're committing fraud and they don't want to be caught. It's kind of like a bank robber walking into a bank with like their home address taped to their chest. Like they wouldn't do that. They'd rather anonymize themselves and remove that address and then go rob the bank, right? In the digital world, fraudsters they're going to anonymize themselves before they commit fraud, or at least they're going to try. And this is what we block out of the gaming industry all day long. This is like our focus. And so, we really do see a lower amount of fraud and margin loss in the gaming industry because we've had such a head start in this particular vertical because of the laws and regulations. And now operators and everyone is starting to really see the value and how it can really, really impact their margins by reducing the fraud there. And now, especially since COVID, where digital transactions are like at an all-time high, and really fraud incentive is just, it's increasing day by day. We think we could be a critical part of really every digital transaction. Just like you wouldn't enter your personal information into a form that wasn't, protected by HTTPS, right? It's,
right.
Your URL. Like in the future, we think that the user demand for a geo-compliance check, the G, would be an essential piece before transacting with really anyone, because you don't want to transact with someone that is actively trying to spoof really where they are or who they are. And I see GeoComply kind of living out that vision of like our mission is really to empower the future of digital trust in general, not just for gaming, certainly for gaming, but also for really non-gaming industries as well. And lastly, I kind of think we see our tech being used for good really throughout the world right now. We work closely with federal and state law enforcement. We help catch, criminals committing heinous acts and from human trafficking and on down the line. And it's really been extremely amazing to see this tech that was so specifically created for the gaming industry being used across a really wide spectrum of use cases, and ultimately helping remove fraud and crime from the world.
That's awesome. And I think that is certainly something that is possible. GeoComply has already proven itself in a number of industries and will continue to do so. Now, specific to the gaming industry, though, one thing that always concerns a lot of people is when you add an additional layer between the end user and the platform, there's a concern over latency, especially when you're in a hurry to make that bet. You have a live option going on, but GeoComply doesn't have to deal with that. I mean, it doesn't, adding that additional layer has not impacted the throughput or the latency between the end user and the gaming platform, which again is another huge plus for what GeoComply can offer. However, I'm sure that operators have on occasion been a little reluctant about integrating a third-party solution into their systems. How has GeoComply been able to counter that reluctancy and the hesitation that some of the operators have shown when it comes time to have them to bring GeoComply on board?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I say we work really hard to try to improve or try to make that experience of integration as painless as possible. Like the entire market, is integrated, and we strive to be as invisible and frictionless to the end user. But we understand that it takes some development effort to actually integrate the product in a way that is invisible. And generally, I'd say the industry is comfortable with the integrations. And especially when now they're starting to see the value beyond just geolocation compliance, but more so from how it can ultimately impact and reduce fraud. And so it's not just a compliance goal anymore. It's also how can we improve business really and keep the inappropriate players out. But there really is a lot of nuances and detail that are important to get this right. And we're always trying to think of creative ways to enhance that experience both for the developers and for the public. But as an example, we're working right now on a really great laboratory where our clients can come in and receive trainings and integrate across a series of devices and measure latency, like you said, per device, and sort out all sorts of UX details so we can optimize an integration. And it's things like this that we think will kind of have will continuously make geolocation kind of fade into the background for the legit users and front and center for the fraudsters, but also a bit easier and more tools to make that integration process seamless, more seamless.
Well, of course, that is the key, right? As seamless as it can be, the better it will be for the user experience as well as the operator. So, and as you hinted about some of the ancillary services, GeoComply, for example, are you seeing more interest in these other services, either as an entire package or as a standalone service?
Oh, completely. Yeah, GeoComply. Yeah, that's our user authentication or KYC solution. Mm-hmm. It's really done. It's done extremely well. It's still early in its life cycle actually, but it's already entered the market, provided an enhanced way to handle user authentication. We're utilizing more than typical variety of data sources, and so we're able to provide nearly 95% approval rates, but also more effectively block out the users who are not who they say they are. And this particular portion of our business has grown. I think it's the last number I heard was 2,600% in the past year, which is significant. But it's also early in its life cycle, right? It's a new product, but we're really, and I think we'll really start to see it blossom in the next few years. The real differentiating opportunity for us with GeoComply and for the industry is the ability to combine geolocation with identity checks. Mm-hmm. And this doesn't mean that we would block people for signing up out of state. No, that's not what I mean. Like what we're doing is we're using the true location of a person as an important source of risk before authenticating an account. Because, as it turns out, if you don't really know where the player is and you're doing user authentication, you're actually hugely disadvantaged because fraudsters will try to spoof their location before committing fraud. And over time, we see them target operators who can't decipher what a VPN is, or a proxy, or an emulator, or a fake location app. They're going to be using those things in order to fraudulently, create accounts and commit bonus abuse and all sorts of fraud. And so, we know that spoofing location is like a key tool in a fraudster's toolbox. And we think that fusing that with the user authentication product is sort of like peanut butter and jelly. It just goes together.
If it had been around 30 years ago, there would have been hundreds of people that would not have had their identities stolen and used online. I mean, it's even though there may be some hesitation on the consumer side to incorporate something like GeoComply, it's a valid service that needs to be in place. Excuse me, and it's a lot of benefits to all industries, right? Not just gaming, all industries.
Oh, absolutely, definitely for all industries. Particularly attractive is the gaming market for fraudsters, especially with the bonuses and things like that that have been coming out lately for new markets. And so, you know, a lot of those attempts to try to get the bonus money out of the system are actually coming from the other side of the world, right? So it's you know, there's certain types of fraud that happen within the state, and there's other types of fraud that happen attempts from outside, and we're able to kind of like see those trends and measure the difference and assess the new attack vectors that come out literally every day.
And that's just it. It's an ongoing process to stay on top of it. But GeoComply has been able to do it. Obviously, it's still. I'm amazed at the level of service that it can provide without disrupting the flow of traffic. I mean, it's really unheard of in virtually any industry that one solution is able to counter so many threats simultaneously without interrupting the traffic and the flow of information. So it's GeoComply is just really it nailed it without a doubt. And it's going to be interesting to see how things go over the next couple of years, like you said. Speaking of which, where does Chad see, not GeoComply, but where does Chad see iGaming 5 years from now?
Oh, geez, 5 years. Okay. Well, let me think about that. I guess there's a lot that will happen in the next 5 years. As we're seeing the media, we're seeing gaming being like woven into just the news and social media and just the fabric of everyday life. We're seeing deeper exposure. Like the general public is going to continue to, the wagering community is going to grow and grow and grow. And I think as we see that, we're going to see a ton of, we'll see a bigger driver for convenience. So being able to place a wager from, you know, a streaming device from your home or from your smartwatch or from those sorts of things. And then we'll see more customization of the content. To some degree sports betting, but certainly not online casino, where I think we're going to see more of a peer-to-peer structure, strategy games, a little bit of like esports style gaming a little bit. And then I think we'll see the random surprise games change a bit too. You know, there's still always going to be a market for slot games, but I think we're going to see a more quickly growing segment that is not slot games. And of course, we'll see blockchain enter the equation. Do we yet know understand where or exactly how or what it will actually provide the community? Not quite yet, but it's intriguing. But particularly tradable digital credits and assets and tokens and those sorts of things are going to be an interesting, you know, convergence with gaming. And I guess in light of all that, as it becomes more and more integrated into daily life, I think responsible gaming is going to be a major, major, major responsibility. With the availability of all this content, it's just going to become increasingly important. And the system is really a bit, you know, it needs some support. For example, if someone's had a little bit too much and they take a break and they want to exclude themselves from, you know, their favorite app, they can just choose one of the other, you know, 20, 30, 40 apps that are within that state and continue. And if they want to, and if they've done that on all 30 or 40, they could just step across the state line and do the same there. And we're actually working on some really exciting initiatives through nonprofit conscious gaming to try to solve those sorts of problems.
Well, and it is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Responsible gaming is on the forefront of every bit of legislation that comes forward. And as you mentioned, it's right now in the US especially, it's so easy to jump from one to the other. one platform to the other. ID Comply would help resolve that as well. Verified identifications. What about virtual reality and augmented reality? Will they continue to grow in the iGaming space?
I think so. I think certainly with we actually, I remember doing a demo a few years ago of like a peer-to-peer poker model, and it was really interesting to be able to step into that world and actually feel like you're sitting at a poker table, and then take that a step further with proxy, like not the illegal form of proxy of where you're betting from out of state or trying to play bet of state through a human proxy, but the actually, I think it was in Bahamas that did this at first, where you can actually have someone walk through a casino like with a 360 camera, but you can actually experience that from home through your computer. Hey, I want to play at that table versus that table. Being able to do that in a virtual reality world where you can physically see all around you is super cool. And I think it'll happen. Will there be a big market for it? It's yet to be known, but it's certainly possible.
I think for something like that, at least another decade, another 15 years before there's a substantial market. In the meantime, there will be the techies that fall in love with it. There already are, but to find any real footing in the iGaming market, it's going to take a lot more time for it to develop, and the technology still has to develop as well. So, Chad, that's really all that I have on my list of questions to bombard you with today. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No. I think it was great. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and those were really great questions. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
The pleasure is all ours, and I look forward to watching GeoComply as it continues to dominate and become more integrated into not just gaming, but all industries. So thanks, Chad, for your time today, and we wish you the best.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Eric.
Take care.